The motorized Athearn Blue Box P42 now has its decoder, and as you can see in those previous clips of it running, it runs very well. I'm actually very impressed with the running qualities and the slow speed performance. There's very little cogging, and there's a good usable speed range. I ended up adjusting CV5 lower as the top end speed was a little too fast, but throughout the speed range it's smooth. The sound, to my untrained ears, is great, but I've been made aware of a sound profile by another YouTube user which is more accurate, and I've emailed them to see about purchasing that profile. The P42 is mostly finished, but I still need to add the cab interior, and I'm considering adding a cab light, but I'm undecided at the moment. And maybe uncoupling levers, but I haven't had much luck getting uncoupling levers to look symmetrical, so maybe I need to build a jig or buy some that are close enough. And with the P42 project wrapping up, I've been considering what next I'm going to focus on. I'll only briefly mention the Acela revamp. There's not a whole lot that's going to change, just a motherboard swap to a larger decoder buddy. The lighting will be adjusted and swapped around, and depending on how the iPhone speaker fits with the new motherboard, that might get changed out for something smaller, since it needs to be relocated. This one's going to be fairly quick once the new motherboard and order of LEDs comes in. Since the Decoder Buddy Mini in the Acela is getting replaced, I'm going to have that extra motherboard. It could be used in the Rivarossi FEF, but I'm thinking something a little more red and James-ish. I've had a Bachmann James for a long time now. You know, this is the old one since the wheels are gray and not black. I grew up with Thomas the Tank Engine, with both the Ringo and George Carlin narrations especially, and James was always a favorite character. I am by no means an adult Thomas fan, but I recognize what effect the series had on me and my love of railroading. Some of the work the Thomas fan community has put out is really neat to see, and I was inspired to take my old Bachmann James and start to rework it to be more accurate to the show, specifically those early model seasons. The molded on handrails, the whistle have all been carved off, and the cab has been opened up for some interior detailing. That Decoder Buddy Mini should fit in nicely in the tender, and I'm thinking this would be a great excuse to create a custom sound profile. That's a ways off at this point, but is something I'm thinking about. Watch this space. I'll probably have a separate video, I'm sure. One model that has had some good progress is the Roco G12 locomotive I picked up at the Austin train show last year. This has sat in pieces for most of the last 6 months, but I've started making some progress on the wiring. The motor has been swapped out and mounted for a Mabuchi motor, which is a perfect fit, and it runs really nicely. I've wired up an ESU Next 18 adapter board, which will sit in the firebox, and a sugar cube speaker will sit in the smoke box. This means I'm going to either have to cut the loco weight down or use a different method of weighing down the chassis, and I'm still considering options here. Since the chassis gets pushed by the tender, you definitely need weight, otherwise the wheels don't turn. Besides that, all this really needs is the lighting in the tender to be wired up and a decoder purchased and programmed. ESU has a sound file for this locomotive, so I'll probably go with that. Jumping back to the Rivarossi FEF, I've been debating how I want to handle that one. And after picking up a copy of Kratville's The Mighty 800, I found that there's a photo of 843 being used for some publicity shots. 843 has no smoke lifters, is coal burning, and it looks amazing. And this photo has me rethinking about what I want to do with this Rivarossi model. And I'm thinking about reverting it back to coal, which means my work of turning the tender from a coal tender to an oil tender is now moot and needs to be undone. This wouldn't be difficult, thankfully. I'd need to build a small recessed area and fill it with real coal and paint it black. She'll also need ash pans, but detail parts for that should be available. The smoke lifters will be removed, which is easy enough, and the mounting holes would have to be filled, and the Mars light, well, that's gonna have to go too. I may light up the classification lights though. Maybe I'll do that in a separate video. The last project piece is similar to the P42 in that it is also an Athearn Blue Box engine. This is a Blue Box SW1500 decorated as NASA's number 2. I grew up in Florida, and next to train spotting and model railroading, spaceflight is something I really love, so any chance to combine the two is great. I was originally going to add DCC and sound to this model using TCS's Wow Sound Diesel 101 decoder, which you may remember from the P42, but I realized quickly that the decoder was way too big and the Blue Box motor, not that nice performance-wise. I had gone back and forth with how I wanted to power this thing, considering Northwest Shortline's Stanton Drive powered trucks, or mounting the shell on a newer Athearn switcher chassis, which likely wouldn't work from what I understand. I've decided that I'm going to use a milled chassis from A-Line, which has space for modern can motors and additional weight. and A-lines drivetrain that I also used in the P42 since that set came with 2 pairs. The motor will likely be a smaller dual-shaft Mabuchi motor. These things have high torque and low RPMs, and since the top speed of these things was maybe 20 miles per hour, they don't have much need for high speed. The shell has already gotten a fair amount of detailing, including etch parts from Canon. The steps have been replaced with etched metal that you can see through. The walkways have that diamond texture. The front and rear have gotten or are getting additional details like hoses and uncoupling levers. Number boards and LEDs need to be installed, and it will probably get, like the P42, a Shapeways cab interior. I've decided that lighting for this switcher will be front and rear headlights and the strobe light. I've considered lighting the number boards, but I think that's going to be beyond the scope of this particular project. And that about does it for now for the current projects. I have more planned for the OO9 Narrow Gauge layout, but it's on hold a bit until the UK can sort out some issues with the mail. And I'm not going to be purchasing any more locomotives for a while, as the Athearn FEF hit my wallet pretty hard right at Christmas, and that just killed my modeling budget for a little while. A lot of models need to get decoders, and I need to invest in a Lokprogrammer, but there are some ideas I have in mind for future projects once I have others finished. First, I'd like to do an AMTRAK Pumpkin GP9. I have no need for one, but I love the color and I love my AMTRAK stuff. This seems like it'd be a pretty unique project, and I've debated on what basis the model will be, but it will likely be a Walthers mainline KCS GP9. It's plain white with red letters, so it should be pretty easy to get a nice orange on there, and it also lacks the dynamic brake. Next, I'd like to do another P42, but this time in the Phase 5 paint scheme to match what I see in my area, maybe decorated and weathered like one I've personally seen. Athearn's current updated model is very nice, but I'm tempted by the Kato model with its drive system, and like the blue box model Athearn, it lacks a lot of detail that I could add. We'll have to see on that one. That's going to do it for today, folks. I want to thank you so much for joining me today and taking a look at the P42 and its running characteristics and some of the projects I have going on. Stay tuned for more. If you've enjoyed the content, consider subscribing. And, well, if you'll excuse me, I have a very messy workbench to go ahead and clean up, so I'm going to get to that. I'll see you on the next one.